Hello there. Normally, this is Parley, a series where people like you support the stuff I do by asking me a question and paying me money to make a facecam video about it. YatogamiOdin did this, and I messed up. I deleted my first draft, and then when I recorded the video again, I didn't do your little spoilered out part at the end, which is probably a conclusion. So I'm going to respond to that now. And you also posted something on Discord responding to some stuff I said in the main video. So I'll link that if you want to go watch the main parlay. It's about balance in PvE. I'm not going to talk about it more because I already recorded an hour about it. But yeah, this will be a little response to that, kind of finishing up your request. First, I'll just read the rest of what you wrote. Sorry for messing that up. I got confused, I guess, because I did it twice. But yeah, you put something at the end of the comment you posted on Discord that I thought was really interesting, kind of a topic in and of itself. So please accept this like mini freebie as an apology. And for the wait as well. Like, you really didn't need to wait as long as you did. Right. So on the main question, just to very quickly summarize, because I know when I make videos like this, about 50% of you don't go watch the other video. You just want to watch this, which, like, that's fine. Basically, YatogamiOdin quoted some developers of a game they play who said, when one thing is overpowered, we're just going to let it be overpowered. As we've been developing this game, we don't think balance is required in PvE when players are not playing against each other, basically. Players must be able to fulfill their fantasy and have fun with the game. To the abyss with balancing. Fun comes first. And Yatogami and I both think it's a bit absurd to claim that balancing has any other goal than, making the game more fun. Why do these developers believe other developers balance things? Because they develop video games not for fun? And of course, there are a few obvious reasons that I kind of talk about in the main video, but I really don't think they hold up. Balancing is obviously a tool to make the game more fun. So it's odd to hear a developer say this. Maybe they are just atrocious at game development. Maybe they don't mean it. Maybe they're intentionally lying to give players the right idea that they care about power fantasy or whatever, but they know that balancing is actually valuable to preserve that, and they're gonna do it. They just wanted to give players the idea that they're sort of on their side, which sounds deceptive, but I think a lot of developers do that. I talked about that a lot in the main video. There could be a lot of reasons. Yatogami has a conclusion, and I'm going to read it. Ultimately, Yatogami says, I think the devs are using the word balance in a very different sense. I guess they kind of must be. In particular, they seem to perceive balance as an obstacle to fun, where in my view, fun arises from the deep satisfaction that comes from navigating a web of meaningful choices. I think the core ideas behind balance and fairness, are fairness and empowerment. Players should be given meaningful choices and tools that improve their ability to interact with the game world. If given a tool that provides a benefit that eclipses the alternative, the customization space becomes skewed toward that tool. There are many examples, Viral and Warframe, for example, and avoiding those skews is part of what makes a game more balanced. Yeah, it's weird, like, it's sort of another, I don't think this is true, but another theory would be like, did the developers not know? Do they just think it's impossible for something to be balanced? Like, I don't know. It's just really weird. Like, I'm sure there are some developers, and a lot of players think this, that think that balance is just like a mistake or something. But again, I know a lot of people don't get to this point, but it's like, so why do you think that so many developers are doing it? Like, what reason do they have? Why do they think it would be good? I don't know. It's just really weird. Like, again, if you think balance doesn't work out, as I talked about in the main video, you could argue, after looking at like the obvious benefits to balancing and why it can make the game more fun for everyone, you could pull back and say, yeah, but what people have a problem with is bad balancing. And balancing is bad, done poorly, hard, so consistently that I would almost rather they don't balance the game, which, like, I don't agree, but that isn't insane. Like, I don't think that is madness. I strongly disagree, but I don't think it's like stupid to think that. It's sure, I guess, like, that is a conclusion. I do think that there have been games in the past that were balanced so poorly that it made the game worse. Warframe in the past, the status rebalancing, I do believe, made the game worse than it was before it. It made it better in some ways, but the cost was too high, is how I would put it. So that's an example. Sure, Warframe has been a very helpful example this whole time. But I wanted to go in a different direction. Yatogami, you wrote something that I thought was a really good bouncing off point. This is a comment you wrote responding to the first video, and you said something really good in it, and I wanna talk about that for a few minutes. We have this extra video, so we have a bit of time, so let's do that. So the topic again is this thing about like after that whole parlay, especially if you watch the hour-long thing, you might be thinking, yeah, why do people think that developers balance if it's not like for fun? Like obviously it's intended to be for more fun, and you might not get why. Hopefully if you watch that video, you do feel like you understand why. To say it in as short a time as possible, the idea is simply that if more things are powerful, well, you can fulfill your power fantasy. Is being given a thing your power fantasy? No, you want to choose your thing. You imagine, yeah, superpower or whatever that you have. Yeah, that's your power fantasy. So if I just give you one thing and that's the only thing, and that's not a fantasy you have, then it's not much of a power fantasy, is it? And if you make a lot of things really powerful, well, that's fine. Then in the grand scheme of things, you can go one step further and say, well, if something is made weaker, but it's not weak, like you're still powerful, then yeah, I mean, you might not like that, and that's a shame. But the truth is that if the developers balance it effectively, and you just don't like its new balanced form, well, they always intended it to be that way. Apparently the game, you just don't like that game. Balancing is not the problem there. Apparently the developer's vision for the game, when they correctly execute that vision, either on the first try or by using balance to correct their mistake the first time, if they do that and they think it's balanced and you don't like it, that's not a problem with balance. That means you do not like what the game presents as a power fantasy, as it were. That doesn't mean balance is bad. That means this balance doesn't appeal to you. This level of balance. Maybe the difficulty. It's too easy, too hard. Something like that. But that isn't really a balance issue. So in theory, as long as players like the balanced experience the developers are trying to make, people like some part of the game, and the developers intend that part of the game, then making more things in the game be at that level will make the game more fun for more people, because there'll be more options. And whether or not things need to be adjusted down or up to get to that intended level that people enjoy and the developers actually want to deliver doesn't really matter. Like, people overreact about nerfs, and part of the reason is that they're often done poorly. Things are often balanced too low. The developer has the misguided idea that they should make things a little weaker because the players are biased to play them. But an experienced developer knows that just nerfing something will make everybody run away from it, even though that's unjustified. You could probably actually under-nerf things that are too powerful. They'll remain a little overpowered, but players will run away like children anyway. So I don't know. Anyway, so that's weird, right? Like, it's not that hard to explain why balancing would make a game more fun. What all is the other purpose of balancing? And so Yatogami, you said something in this response that was a really long prelude, I know, that I thought was really good. So I'm going to read it. You were responding originally to something I said about, you said the primary appeal of games with deep customization is this thing, and I was saying there's a lot of appeals for games with deep customization. But you said something in that response that I thought was really smart. So you said, I think the time and effort needed to implement deep customization should have a corresponding impact on player engagement. Otherwise, it feels like a poor use of dev resources. In other words, why waste time on a system without meaningful choices? The presence of those choices might not be valuable to every player, but to include them at all speaks to the dev's intent for the player to get invested. Right, like, even beyond just like people have this horrid, absurd notion that the developers do not want you to have fun with their video game that they bent over backwards to create. It is very difficult to make a video game that is fun. They want you to have fun. They would not do that if they didn't want you to have fun. I mean, I know all of you know this, but it's just totally ridiculous. And I really hate it when people say, the developers hate fun or whatever. Like, no, they don't. Like, can it? That's not a thing. Maybe the publisher doesn't care about fun. Anyway, the board of directors, the investors don't care about fun. Anyway, but yeah, like the other thing about balance is like when the developers put a system in the game that You know, when you develop a video game, most of the time, you need to communicate with a lot of other people, or you need to pitch your game that you made by yourself to a lot of other people. You need to be able to explain why the thing you put in the game is fun, or people will say no because it takes too much time. Or it's overwrought or something. If you have a game with this complicated system, I do think that a lot of other developers, and certainly just creatives in general, they're going to say, well, you made the game complicated for the player. What is the payoff? Like, why is it worth it to do that? And you know you're going to be balancing the game forever, and it'll be really hard. That'll be a ton of work. Why? Like, it better be really good. Like, and I do think that a lot of games that bother to include even remotely balanced buildcraft where you're meant to make choices like that are actually amazingly balanced. Like, not perfectly. Amazingly doesn't mean like really good. I just mean thinking about how difficult it would be to make it even that good. It's like, holy shit. Like, Path of Exile is a good example. It's not at all perfectly balanced, but looking at that passive skill tree, it's like, wow, this is fairly balanced. Like, it's kind of balanced. I've been playing a few other games recently that have random choices like that. Hades is a simple example of something that it's like, it's fairly well balanced. Like, they sure did use a calculator, you know? And that's not that that's the only thing you use, but you get the point. And so I just wanted to highlight that. I think it's a really funny elephant in the room that I didn't, would have been a good approach in the main video, that I kind of didn't use, that I thought was really smart. Like, you know how much time it takes to make like a buildcraft system and then balance it, and then you're going to have to rebalance it? Like, it takes a lot of time. Believe me, most people would not be willing to put that amount of time into it if they didn't think it was fun, if they felt like there was just no point. I'm not trying to say that there's like no examples of games that don't do that well, like that have a buildcraft system, but there is just no point. A lot of AAA games have been maligned for including RPG elements that just don't matter at all. Or there's a stereotype about looter shooters that you get a lot of loot that has like meaninglessly like 3% attack damage or whatever. And it's like, why? Like, that doesn't matter, you know? Because they're trying to create a gameplay loop with very little development time. And that's an example of just how much effort it takes to make like an actually meaningful but still balanced gameplay loop. Those RPG systems are really easy to create because they make perks that are so boring and underwhelming that you don't have to worry about whether they're like secretly overpowered or whatever, because they just don't do anything. And so you can just put them in and you don't have to balance them at all because they're all completely useless. And in fact, I would say it is even kind of a stereotype in those games that they're like something slips through, like they make something that's like, oh, this actually does something, and then that's just broken. So I don't know, I thought that was really interesting. There's just one other closing thing. Yatogami, I just thought that was a really cool point. But you also mentioned something about, you know, originally this comment was a reply to your comment about the primary appeal of games with deep customization. So I mostly said what I want to say, but I'll highlight this a little because you took the time to write it. There was a part in the main video where you said, on the subject of player sentiment, the primary appeal of games with deep customization is for the player to assemble the game pieces in the way they see fit. And I was talking about how that it certainly isn't the primary appeal of those games. Games that have those options intend at least a few other things. That is not the single primary appeal. For you, and I think for me, that is the primary appeal. But Buildcraft games don't like intend this one thing and nothing else. Like, that's not like their main focus. Now, I don't think that you necessarily cared about that, like dying on that hill too much, by the way. I didn't mean to come out strong against that idea in the main video. I just needed to mention that it's an important point how people enjoy lots of things about a Buildcraft game. But on the topic of balancing for PvE, you can achieve all of those things that are the primary appeals of a Buildcraft game by balancing the game. Like, it's very important to note that people enjoy the game for a reason that is intended, for reasons other than picking different options, but those things aren't interfered with by balance. Like, that's very important, or there might be a problem with balancing for PvE. The whole argument hinges on the idea that everybody wins if balance is done well. If they didn't, then, well, I guess there would be a reason not to balance some games. That would be a reason to just not make buildcraft in those games. But you responded and said, it's feasible that a player could approach a game like Warframe for everything except the builds, which could then be outsourced to the internet. This is reflected in the Magic the Gathering examples raised in the video. People who ran the meta deck were probably more interested in the experience of play and victory than in the process of solving for the deck build. And I wanted to respond to that because that is almost the opposite of what I meant. My point was that in the main video, I gave this Magic the Gathering example, and the idea was that, there have been times in Magic the Gathering's history where there was sort of a deck to beat. If you looked at all the cards in the format, people come in with different mindsets. Some people are looking for, like, I want to play this kind of deck. Let's see what you can do to, like, make it. What is there for a control deck? Can you play Goblin Tribal right now, etc.? Other people might just look for, like, what are the unique different archetypes available right now, and let's play them. I, for example, in the past, really enjoyed that weird Bogbrew Witch deck. That was very bizarre. There hasn't really been a lot like that Bogbrew Witch deck in Standard a lot. There was a time when Turbofog was a viable strategy in Standard. That was pretty cool. I played Mono Blue Illusions briefly with Runechanter's Pike. That was interesting. Birthing Pod and Green Sun Zenith were both in Standard at the same time, which is a nightmare hellscape. But I played that deck too because I'm a scumbag. I was interested in just, like, what are the unique builds you can make, and let's fiddle with them, or with the Green Sun Zenith Birthing Pod thing. Well, you're going to play green, but, like, what other colors? And we had a lot of black morbid cards, so I played that version, but there was a lot of different ways you could approach it. Other people approach the Magic the Gathering metagame by trying to, they would say, kind of solve it. And Yatogami, in your response, you were discussing that as if the people who were running that meta deck weren't interested in, like, solving for the format. They played that deck because they wanted to play and win. But my point is that they probably did, a lot of them, try to solve for the format, and that is why they played that deck with various tweaks. They were trying to get an edge over the other versions of it. I was talking about Cobblade in the main video, very notorious Standard Magic the Gathering deck, and they couldn't find anything. Like, they probably wanted to solve for the best deck in the format. They didn't want to choose a deck based on preference. They wanted to find the deck that is the most powerful, which is still in their judgment. But my point is that is buildcraft. That's a different appeal than organizing the choices the way you see fit. They're not interested in choosing which thing, but they're still very interested in the different buildcraft choices. They just don't. Their preference is the thing that the game presents them with, not, like, the one they want to play, I guess you would say. I wanted to highlight that a bit more. And I think I should give a different example to dig into that a little better. In a lot of games, there will be some element in the game that it's not immediately obvious why that would be good. So in a lot of games, the stereotypical one is there's a way to very cheaply do a small amount of damage to yourself, and there isn't any immediately obvious reason to do that. It's like, why? That doesn't seem beneficial. And of course there is. And so for some players, the appeal is like going on a scavenger hunt to find out, like, okay, they put this in the game. Why? Where's the thing they put in? And I think that is part of buildcraft. I think if you're interested in that, you're interested in the unique mechanism, the unique collection of choices, or the variance in that collection of choices to make that strategy work. It doesn't have to be about, like, you choosing which strategy. You might be interested in being directed toward a strategy in the same way that driving a dune buggy over an open range of the desert is fun, and a roller coaster is also fun. They're not completely dissimilar. I reckon that people who like one have a pretty good chance of liking the other, but they are rather qualitatively different. It is still a different thing. They're both, riding a exciting vehicle, but they build craft. But they're very different forms of that. And I just wanted to dig into that a little bit more. My example in the main video about the people running the meta deck in a tournament in Magic was meant to illustrate how those people also wanted buildcraft, but for them, it was okay if there wasn't variety. There's the thing they were enjoying was partially the experience of play and victory, but also like determining what the deck was. And the key, the final point I'm going to leave on is that it's worse for those people too. The great thing about that example that I didn't really dig into as much is that even if you don't want variety, generally the thing that you're enjoying, if you enjoy finding like the best thing, that process itself is more interesting if there is more stuff that is viable. You can always limit your search terms and something will be the best. So people who want to find that thing, it's not like they can't decide on a deck if like things are pretty balanced, right? And indeed, many of those players in interviews said, like it's not like I didn't like Magic when it wasn't like this. I don't specifically enjoy that there is only one viable deck. In fact, many of them probably liked there being a larger variety of decks, because then the process of solving for like the best deck or whatever, which there really isn't one in most cases, that's more interesting because you sort of respond to things. The big problem with Cobblade was that there really wasn't a way to counter it. It just sort of did everything. It was a control deck that was too fast. It was a mid-range deck that had way too much value and killed you too quickly. It was too good at stopping aggro decks. The way that it did its controlling was weirdly very safe. You didn't really have to sacrifice anything. You started doing things very early. For a deck that was playing the long game or equipped to play the long game, it was able to be very proactive. That's another problem. Like you could really get a lot done if your opponent wasn't doing anything, and then if they were, you had plenty of stuff to do. You could interfere with them. It's just too good. Like the deck got to do too much stuff, and that meant that it wasn't really interesting to respond to it. It wasn't an interesting equation to solve. So I thought your response was really interesting, really good, and I wanted to respond to it myself. The point about like the people running the meta deck being more interested in the experience of play and victory than in the process of solving, I really think that's not true for the most part. It doesn't sound like it from what those people said. I think that a lot of people who play tournament Magic, like a lot of the play is solving for the meta, or understanding to what degree you cannot solve for the meta. I don't really think there are many good Magic players that are not interested in that because it's like the game. The game is poker, and then you do that before you play poker. They invent new poker decks every 3 months, and you have to like figure out what kind of hands people are going to play. I don't know. Anyway, maybe that's not true, but that was not the point of my example, so I wanted to respond to that. Thought it was really good, just like the rest of this parlay. It was really well worded. I hope I'm not embarrassing you by saying that a lot. I just thought this was a really, really well thought out parlay question, and I'm just very interested in this topic. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little addendum video.